Hello everybody and welcome back to another Overwatch League 2021 roster breakdown video. Today we will be taking a look at the Dallas Fuel. They finished the 2020 season 13 overall with a 9-11 record and a -7 differential. So, a team that underwent a ton of changes going into 2020. Those changes did not work out. Massive falling out with Decay. They clean their house, get rid of their coaching staff, get rid of all but one player, and rebuild a new roster. So, how does this new roster look? Let's take a look at that. Before we talk about that, I just want to say that obviously this video should have gone up on Friday of last week. I had an event on Saturday that I had been preparing for, and so I kind of dropped the ball in getting this video out on time. So you're getting 3 videos this week. You're getting the Dallas Fuel video today. You'll be getting the Chengdu Hunters video on Wednesday, and you'll be getting the Toronto Defiant video on Friday. So be on the lookout for that, as well as you're going to get a BlizzCon online video on Thursday. So those are the things that you're going to expect today. So let's jump in. Let's talk about the Dallas Fuel now that we have that out of the way. I'm going to start by talking about the tank line. As I mentioned, this team only has one returning player, and that is Doha in the DPS section. So both tank players on this team are new additions to this roster. They have 0 rookies on this team this season. Every player on this team has Overwatch League experience, including this tank line. For the main tank, it is Fearless, a role star last season with the Shanghai Dragons. He leaves from a very successful Dragons team to go over to the Dallas Fuel to play with a bunch of players that he knows from Element Mystic. I don't think he ever played with any of these players. He may have been coached by Rush in the past, but I don't think he played with any of these players. He may have played with Jexa and Repel, but those are the only 2 that I think he may have played with. So, huge main tank here, Fearless. His Winston last season was really, really good. I also thought he had a pretty solid Reinhardt. It wasn't anything incredible, but it was pretty good. His Risa was not great. It was basically the main weakness for this team for the Shanghai Dragons last season. Whenever he was playing the Risa, it was just not incredible. His ball, we didn't see a lot of, but I wasn't super impressed from what we did see. So this is an interesting situation to be in for Fearless, where last season the Dragons had the ability to run Fearless primarily, and they got kind of lucky that Winston and Reinhardt had a lot of time in the meta, and Winston especially as the season kind of progressed, Winston became very, very big, and so they had the luxury of actually being able to put Fearless on one of his best heroes. But when playoffs came around and they couldn't have Fearless on one of his best heroes, a lot of the problems for this team became very clear and noticeable. So that is something that I am a little concerned about with the Dallas Fuel, because they only have one main tank and one off tank. Their off tank being Hanbin, formerly of the Paris Eternal. So it is a concern when you have a main tank who only has really, really, really proven himself to be a top level Winston, but his Reinhardt has not been super impressive. His Orisa was very weak, and his Wrecking Ball was not super impressive. Now, you pair him with Hanbin, who I thought last season was one of the best off-tanks in the league. He's very good, and he is a player who, on Sigma especially, looked incredible. His D.Va was good as well. We didn't see a ton of Zarya from him last season, though that is something he's also very much known for, so it's interesting. Hanbin had a bit of an issue last season with deaths. He was not the most survivable, but he's a very aggressive off-tank player. He gets a lot of damage in, and that's one of the things that I think will be interesting for this Dallas Fuel team. I think this is going to be a very fast-paced, aggressive roster. This is not going to be a roster that is passive and sits back. Fearless wants to make plays and wants to jump in head first. Hanbin does as well, so that is something I am definitely looking out for with this tank line, is the aggression and how well they kind of pair with their support line for that. I think it's an interesting tank line just in general. This is two very good players. I think Hanbin had a case for being a role star last season, and had a case for being an MVP candidate. I think he should have been an MVP candidate personally, over Xe, but they opted to give it to Xe instead. But I do think Hanbin is very good, and I thought he was one of the best parts of the Paris Eternal last season, and arguably the piece of the Eternal last season who was the best, and also the most consistent. So I am excited to see what he does now with who I believe is a top-class main tank. As much as I think Ben Best was improved last season, I still am not super high on Ben Best. I still think Ben Best had a lot to prove, and he still was not at the level of consistency and top-level competition that I think Dallas needed. I don't think he was the only problem on that team. I think it became very clear throughout the season that DPS flexibility was a problem, but you have a much stronger main tank now next to Hanbin. I think that will allow Hanbin much more freedom, and I think that'll make this Dallas Fuel tank line significantly better than what we saw from the past with both Hanbin and Ben Best. Now, Fearless is getting a downgrade as his partner. Hanbin is still good. It's not a huge downgrade from Void to Hanbin, but it is a downgrade, and I'm curious to see if that will help or hurt this team at all. How much of Fearless's success last season was because the team around him was really good, and how much it was just because Fearless himself was very good. We saw the impact that Fearless himself had between him and Stand 1, where Fearless was way more successful. Obviously, the main melee, he comes in, they reverse sweep the Shanghai or the Seoul Dynasty. Huge moment for the team, and really kind of the redemption arc for Fearless. But how much of the success of the team as a whole was because of Void's play and, you know, having a really good support line, and how much of it was Fearless himself? That is one of the things we'll have to look at with this newly formed Dallas Fuel roster, but I am curious to see how it goes, and interested to see how it looks with this new tank line duo who we've not seen play together before. So that is something I'm very interested in seeing. Another place I'm really interested in is the support line for this Dallas Fuel team. They have 3 players on the support line, 1 main support and 2 flex supports. The main support is Jexa, of course, formerly of the Houston Outlaws. Before that, played with the Seoul Dynasty. I think Jexa was one of the best players for the Houston Outlaws last season. I thought he was one of the bright spots. He was a bit of a late signing for this Fuel roster, which I think is interesting. I don't know if it was something that was planned well in advance, that they just kind of waited to announce, or if they were trying to like mislead people. I really don't know. I think Jexa is a very good player. I think his Lucio in particular is very good. His Mercy, his Brig are okay. They're not incredible, but they are strong, and I think that he's not such a weakness on those heroes that it's going to be a liability. Obviously, he wants to be on the Lucio. That's really where he excels. I don't see many situations where he won't be playing a lot of Lucio, because Lucio's been meta for about a year, 2 years now, I guess. But we've been seeing a lot of Lucio play, so I wouldn't expect that to change very much, but he's a player I'm looking out for. Next to him are 2 flex supports who I'm very, very high on, which I think is very good. The first one I want to talk about is Fielder. Played for the Paris Eternal last season, was a mid-season addition for them, joined them very late in the season. Well, I guess in the middle of the season. Never was able to come to the US to play with the Paris Eternal, but was an incredible player for this team. 200 ping, having a huge impact, helped lead the Paris Eternal to the win in the Summer Showdown. One of the most impressive seasons, for a player who was not in the same country as the rest of his team. So now he gets to be with the team in the same country and able to bond with his teammates, have no issues with ping or anything like that. So that I think is a huge benefit for this team, and I think Fielder will be a super impressive piece. Obviously, a player who does not have a history with Element Mystic. Before playing for the Paris Eternal, he was with GC Busan. So someone who was scouted and brought in by Rush, stays with this team, moves over with Rush and Aid to join this Dallas Fuel roster. So I think he's the interesting piece because he is the only piece that does not have that connection with GC Busan. He just has the connection with the Paris Eternal. And I think that he is a player who has a lot of potential and looked very good. I don't know if he will get the start over Rappel, who we saw last season with the Houston Outlaws. I think Fielder has been good, but I have been very impressed with Rappel. Last season, I thought Rappel looked very good, especially on Zenyatta. I wonder if there will be a bit of a switch between the two, because I think Rappel's Zenyatta is really good, and I think Fielder's Ana is really good, and I don't know if I feel like one is better than the other at that. I don't know which of these two will start. We've seen them switch between them during the next cup. They were not sticking with one or the other. They were switching between the two a lot, so it'll be interesting to see if they do opt to go with them both, or if they'll have one that they pick. I think with Jexa, we would likely see Rappel at least the beginning of the season. Over time, we might see a transition over to Fielder, but I think Rappel is really good. And I think that one of the things that we never got to really see from Rappel was just how good he is because of the situations he found himself in. In 2019, he was the Vancouver Titans. He was sitting behind Twilight, and Twilight is one of the best flex supports in the league. It's going to be very difficult to sit down if you're Twilight and not play because you're just that good. You're such a strong player. Rappel was not going to have much of a chance of taking that starting job from Twilight. And when we did see Rappel play, he was very good. So this is a team that in a double flex support meta has two really good players in Rappel and Fielder. But, Rappel and Jexa were both on the Houston Outlaws last season. That team had a number of problems. They did not have a great main tank. And that was the thing that I think held the team back the most. They had some moments where they looked pretty good. And you can't discount the fact that, they had 5 players that I think you could reasonably rely on. It was really just the tank that you could not really get solid play out of, and it was just so unreliable with, Muma was not playing well, then he had an injury, and then you went to Hydration, who wasn't natural in the role, and so that is something to take note of, but it is important to note that these players were on Houston, and while they were definitely the shining parts of Houston, they were not elevating Houston in the way that I think people had expected them to do, and that is something that could be because of coaching. Harsha struggled a lot as head coach last season. He's talked about that, and he made mistakes and he made moves that maybe should not have been what was done, but he kind of owns up to that and admits to that. And so it'll be interesting to see how these two work now with a much better tank line and a much better damage trio that I think will help this support line have to be not as much of a carry that they would have been before. And another instance where we have a very aggressive set of players. Jexa is a very aggressive main support. He is going to pair well, in my opinion, with Fearless because of that, and with Hanbin. They want to go aggressive. They want to do as much damage as possible, and I think that this is something that will work very well for the Dallas Fuel, is having players who all kind of have this very high focus, high energy, super aggressive play style. So I do very much think that this support line will work well with this tank line. I don't know if I think this support line is going to be enough to elevate the whole team. You look at like the San Francisco Shock, where you have a really good support line with FD God and Twilight and Violet, who are just all some of the best in their roles. They elevate the rest of their team. Even though there's stars all over that roster, they make plays, they do that, and they have that huge impact time and time again. I think Jexa has shown to be a very high impact player, and as Lucio especially. I don't know if if Rappel and Fielder will do that. I remember a series last season. I don't remember who it was against. I think it was against the Florida Mayhem, but I could be wrong. But Rappel was on the Zenyatta, and I just remember Rappel was fragging out and he was playing really, really well. He was having a great series, and so I know these players have the potential to do that. I don't know if they're going to be able to do it consistently, and I don't know if they are going to be the shining pieces for this team. But I think that it is a very strong support line. And when you pair that with another very strong tank line, I think you have a very strong base core for your team that your damage dealers have to be good and able to just be, if you can have an elite damage dealer and you can pair that with consistency in these other positions, I think you have a team that has a really good starting spot. So let's take a look at this damage group and see who they managed to bring in. As I mentioned before, the one returning player for this team is Doha. He is a flex DPS player, so he is going to be the main player for their Sombra play, their Pharah, their Junkrat, Echo. Sparkle, of course, the other one, is going to be the main player for the Doomfist, the Genji. He might also be the one who plays Pharah, actually, over Doha. Sparkle's Pharah is really good, so I'd expect him to play Pharah, but it could be either of them, but it'll probably be Sparkle. Sparkle also has a pretty good Hanzo. He also plays Junkrat. Like, there's a lot of crossover between these two, so I don't expect these two to play together very often. There's some possibilities, right? Like, you could see, like, an instance where you need, like, a Doomfist Sombra or something like that. I think it's really, these two will play together mostly if they have to have a Sombra with something that Sparkle plays really well. But I would expect to see a lot of their third DPS player, Exy, who of course was an MVP candidate last season for the Paris Eternal. A very good player. His McCree is one of the best in the league. I think it was the best last season. His Widowmaker is also very good. He's a pretty good Soldier 76, pretty good Hanzo. So they have a very good set of damage players here, but there's a very noticeable problem, and it is in the lack of a very good Tracer player. This is something that has been so noticeable since the moment they signed this roster, that they do not have a strong Tracer player. And we've seen them have to kind of shuffle them out when they were doing the next cup. We saw Exy run it, we saw Sparkle run it, I think we saw Doha run it, I think we saw all three of them run it. And they have different ways of playing and different styles, and it doesn't really work as well as I think that they need it to. There's too much crossover between these hero pools with Doha and Sparkle. They play a lot of similar things. Doha, I think, is really the very standout Sombra for this team, and that's where he kind of distances himself from Sparkle, who is going to be your really good Genji and your Doomfist and your Pharah. But the Sombra is the thing that Doha is very good at. And if there's something we take away from the Paris Eternal of last season, of course, where you had Sparkle and Exy on that team last season, in the playoffs, part of why they struggled is they didn't have a good Sombra player. They were running Soon on Sombra, they tried running Sparkle on Sombra, it never really worked. And so you bring in the same two players with Doha, you immediately get that Sombra taken care of. But you still don't have a very good Tracer player. And Tracer is one of the most important damage heroes. She has been very important since 2017, 2016, since the game came out, right? You need a good Sombra player, or a good Tracer player, and if you don't have a good Tracer player, you're going to struggle in metas where Tracer is big. There are a lot of good players out there who you could run that play Tracer, that have played Tracer in the past. Stellar is one, formerly played with the Boston Uprising, the Toronto Defiant. Most recently, I believe, with Talon Esports. So that's a player who you could bring in. You could bring in Nene, who I think would be a very good signing, because Nene formerly played with the NYXL, was on a very good team, has a strong Tracer, also has a strong Ashe, something I think is interesting, because I don't think Exy has an incredible Ashe. We never saw him really play it. He played mostly McCree or Widowmaker. He very rarely would pull out the Ashe, or if he did, he didn't look as comfortable. I thought Nene looked pretty good on the Ashe whenever he did play it, so I think that will be a good signing for this team, potentially. Especially because Nene is known for his Tracer. It is one of his best heroes. He is very good with it, so 100% a player I think that they should consider signing. Because he has shown to be a strong Tracer in the past. And you go into contenders, there's tons of different players you could sign. Like I said, Assassin was somebody who, until recently, he was just signed to a team, but he was very good as well. Somebody you could have gone after. There's some others who I know of that I'm drawing a blank at the moment, but the thing is, like, there are a lot, but you have to make sure you're grabbing them now before you lose them, because if you don't get them, you're gonna find that you don't have a ton of really good players to fill that role. There's still players out there that are good. There's even some players who are on Element Mystic that were pretty good. You need to figure this out, though, if you are this team. They don't have very strong play out of their DPS players when it comes to Tracer. And that is the one hero that if you do not have a really good Tracer player, you are going to struggle to find success. It has been one of the most consistently dominant heroes since the beginning of the game's competitive life cycle, and you need to find it. Just as a player who was on Element Mystic before, who was known for Tracer, Ace is someone who is known for Tracer, and while not all of them are incredible at the role, you need somebody who you can have as your main Tracer player. So I think Nene or Stellar would be the kind of ideal signing for this team. Nene I think is a little bit better, so if I were the Dallas Fuel, that is who I would recommend going for. But it's an interesting team to see because there is a hole there at DPS that I think needs to be solved. In terms of where I think this team is, I think they are top 5 in North America. That is kind of where I look at them at. I think they have holes. I think they have issues. I think there are teams in North America that I don't want to get too much into who I think is the best and who I think is not the best, because I'm going to say that for my power rankings. I think they're in that top 5 range. They're one of the best teams. They have holes. The Tracer hole, obviously, at DPS is the most noticeable one. Support line, potential problems there. How will they actually fare? Will they be strong? Will they not be strong? It is something that I'm concerned about, and I need to see this team in action more, because they looked somewhat weak in the next cup in terms of their flexibility. It seems like a team that is going to not be meta-proof. They have very strong metas where they will be almost impossible to beat, but there's going to be a lot of metas where they struggle because of a lack of flexibility and some players who are just not really up to the level that you want them to be. I think this is a very interesting team. I think it's going to be a strong team, but I want to see how good they are in practice when we finally get into the season. I'm curious to see if this team will be any good. I think they should be, but it's the Dallas Fuel. They have a history of losing, so only time will tell. But those are my thoughts on the Dallas Fuel. Let me know your thoughts on the team in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. You're getting 2 more this week, so get prepared for those. But that's all from me. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.